Bantam Doubleday Dell Audio Publishing presents Shadow Moon, Book 1 of the Saga of the Shadow War, by George Lucas and Chris Claremont. In the middle of the night, Willow Ufgood rode the back of a dragon. It was a dream. Had to be. He'd gone to bed quite a bit later than usual after a hard day in the fields. The whole family pitched in to help, but the children were still too young to handle stock, and as it was Kaya's special gift to charm the green, growing things of the earth, so it was Willow's to speak to the animals that walked upon it. Occasionally, though, he considered that a mixed blessing, as with today, when his pig decided to behave like a pig and take it into its head that plowing was beneath its station. He couldn't force the beast. It stood as tall as he and outweighed him by more than he cared to think about, which meant he had to resort to persuasion. In that moment, and only for the moment, the world seemed to shift, turning back on itself a whole year. Same field, same situation, although the pig wasn't acting nearly so pig-headed. Willow tilling his soil, as his father had done, and his father before him, and so on back as far as memory went in Nelwyn Vale, distracted suddenly by the cries of his children that they'd found a baby in the bulrushes. That moment had changed his life forever, and the fate of the world in the bargain. The day he'd rescued the sacred princess Elora Danan. Later in the evening, when the children were safely tucked to bed, he retired to his workshop off the back of the house proper. Originally, it was where he stored his tools and made whatever was needed in the way of furniture for the house. Now, in addition, it was where he practiced his magic. On the table was the gift he'd been making for the princess. It was a stuffed bear. Its fur was golden to match her hair. The arms and legs swiveled, so that if Elora hugged the bear, it would feel as though the bear was hugging her back. The bear had actually been finished the better part of a fortnight. Time for even a Nelwyn messenger to carry it to Elora's home, the fabled Daikini fortress of Tir Asleen. Willow had intended to present it himself, but the time he'd have been away would have cost him the better part of this year's crops, and that was a loss his family could ill afford. He turned his gaze to his hands. A year ago, they'd been a farmer's hands, and he a proper Nelwyn with dreams of becoming a sorcerer's apprentice. Now he was a wizard true, and he felt the power crackle within him with every beat of his heart. "Some power," he muttered. "Some wizard who can't even persuade a pig to pull a plow." He went to bed, taking care not to wake Kaya as he snuggled his way gently beneath the sheets. He beat his pillow into its proper shape and rolled over onto his side. To behold the whole wide world, far, far below. He cried out. The dragon laughed. He was nestled in the hollow of a set of shoulders so broad they would easily have fit his entire farm, staring up at a neck that topped the tallest tree he'd ever seen. He didn't want to think of how far the creature stretched in the other direction. Great wings reached out from where he stood, beating only occasionally as the dragon let wind and air do most of the work of keeping it aloft. In spite of himself, Willow pushed to his feet, taking hold of one of the double row of dorsal spines that ran the length of the dragon's back from skull to tail. At this juncture, they stood easily twice the height of a tall Daikini, which made them nearly 4 times his own. The dragon's line of flight put this side of the dorsals in sunlight, and even that faint and fading radiance he saw was enough to paint the body and wings in crystalline fire, as though the dragon were formed of the same golden, glowing substance as the sun itself. It was a beauty so wild, so elemental, it made him ache. No less wondrous was the world through which they flew. Normally, heights terrified him. Here, though, he felt no fear, and decided that was probably because it was so far a fall, his mind simply refused to deal with it. Or better yet, since this was a dream, had to be a dream, he told himself, there was nothing in it that could truly do him harm. So why not stop fretting and enjoy both flight and view? "Why not indeed?" the dragon said companionably. You knew what I was thinking. Think more quietly, then. I'll wager there isn't a creature within mind sight of your dwelling Nelwyn doesn't know your every secret. Willow flushed furiously, as scarlet as the sunset. I'm Denier, Callan Denier. Willow Ufgood. Savior of Alora Dannon, slayer of the demon witch Queen Bovmorda. I know. You've quite a reputation. They flew, and below them was only water, more water than Willow imagined could exist in all the world. Where does it go, Denier, this water? To another land. Only there this is called the Sunrise Sea, and beyond that land, another ocean, and so on, until at last we come back to where we started. Are there people? Domains there as here, all the realms of the Vale folk, plus what you would call Daikini in their mad variety. Kingdoms galore, the greatest being Angwin, which is as far from your home, young Magus, as it's possible to go. There was a rush of wind, exceptionally gentle considering the size of the creature that generated it, as Denier belled his wings and extended his hind legs for landing. Willow saw they were in a different valley, in a land of rolling hills. Willow assumed the dragon had cast some sort of glamour over the castle to mask its presence. He had no other explanation for the failure of any sentries to sound the alarm as the head arched delicately forward to rest on the topmost battlements. Willow wasted no time clambering from his perch. I'll ask again, Denier, he said, turning. Is there some day... He was speaking to darkness and open sky. The beast was gone, as if it had never been. There were torches everywhere along the parapet and walls, arrayed at intervals on poles across the courtyards below, illuminating the bailey to a fair semblance of daylight. There was a day's worth of activity as well. A tumult of people and animals, carts and their cargo, scurrying purposefully to complete the preparations for the upcoming days of celebration. Willow took stock of himself as he hurried along, mindful that, dream or no, he wanted to look his best. He donned his nightshirt before bed, but that was gone, replaced by his usual rustic garb. Willow's hair was shoulder-length and full, mahogany brown at first glance, but shot through with streaks of fiery russet. What he saw in his mirror was a plain man, whose goal was to do honorably by himself, his family, his friends. That was what he offered the world, and all he asked of it in return. If he thought of himself as molasses, then the figures dueling along the parapet were the wildest silver. One was dark, the other fire. Both were Daikini, a man and a woman, lithe and lean, with the bodies and moves of warriors. The black-haired man stood a head taller, but the difference offered no disadvantage. The only spot of color about the black-garbed woman was her red hair, which looked as if she'd been dunked into a vat of autumnal flame. Willow sat down and watched the show. The woman clocked her opponent soundly with her sword hilt, and when he cried out, she tripped his legs out from under him. Before his rump struck stone, she was away with the merriest laugh, daring him to follow her up a flight of stairs and around the corner of the battlements. He cast about, seemingly in confusion, as if unsure which way to go. A moment later, he launched himself into the air, describing a great arc across the bailey, at the end of the halyard used for lifting armaments to the top of the wall. His plan was to swing ahead of her and be waiting when she emerged. Unfortunately, he chose to land right where Willow was sitting. It was a most impressive collision, despite the Nelwyn's last-ditch attempts to scramble clear. "Damn you, Nelwyn," he heard as they untangled themselves. "What god did your kind annoy when they were handing out sizes, eh? Too small to notice, too bloody big to avoid." "I'm pleased to see you too, Madmartigan." Sorcia's contribution to the conversation was a delighted bubble of laughter as she crossed a pair of swords, hers and her husband's, at Madmartigan's throat. "I yield. Now, may we dance?" Carefully, for the blades were honed more keenly than any razor, she set aside the weapons and kissed him. "I thought you weren't coming," Madmartigan said to Willow. "I'm not coming. I'm not here." The two Daikini exchanged deadpan looks. "But I will say I can't remember when I've had a more wild dream." "How'd you make the trip?" "On the back of a dragon." Sorcia smiled. "Sounds like a dream to me." "As long as I'm here," Willow announced, "I'll look in on Alora Dannon." "You always call her by name, Drumheller," Sorcia said. To most everyone else here, she's Her Royal Highness the Sacred Princess. To me, Elora Danan is who she is. I changed her wrappings too often to consider her a sacred princess anything. What did you call me, Sorsha? Drumheller. A warrior term my father taught me before Bavmorda did away with him. A sadness swept her fine features. Part pathfinder, part stalking horse, he or she is the warrior sent ahead of all the rest to charm an ambush out of hiding. It's how I've come to think of you. Your thoughts are more generous than mine. Damn, but you're a thorny bugger sometimes, Willow. Madmartigan clapped him gently on the shoulders. At my size, words have to serve as well as knives for weapons. Unlike you, Daikini, it's not so easy for us to impose our will on others. Not so easy for us either, sometimes especially where it concerns the Veil folk and the realms beyond. The sharpest steel is no match for spells. I suppose you're right. There's always somebody bigger, some force greater, as there are those beneath you in the scale of things. Moments like this strikes me Willow's not the name for you. Bends too easily. All Nelwyns bend, Madmartigan. It's part of how we survive. Maybe so, but anyone fool enough to take a hand to you, I'll wager it comes away bloody. You're not a good Willow, my friend, or a good Nelwyn. There's way too much steel in your soul. I have it, Sorsha announced. For the duration of this dream, let you henceforth be known as Thorn Drumheller. Faster than Willow could follow, she drew her sword and tapped him on the shoulder with the flat of her blade, as for a knightly investiture. Enough of this foolishness. I'm going to find Elora Danan. Elora's apartments were located in the Royal Tower, the core of the castle. The rooms were sumptuously appointed, but it was still impossible to disguise the fact that Tir Aslin was first and foremost a military stronghold. Elora, Madmartigan, and Sorsha shared an entire floor, their bedroom next to hers. Halt! Stand and deliver! Willow heard as he stepped across the threshold. A moment later, for emphasis, he felt the sting of a brownie arrow in his backside. That's not nice, Willow said sternly, yet softly, because he didn't want to wake Elora. Careless big fella he, eh? Said a voice from behind, and Rule strode stiff-legged into view, the brownie's body nearly masked by the weave of the carpet. In a rowdy humor tonight, are we? Willow wondered. Looks the same as always, offered another voice, Rule's companion, Frangine. Talks different, though. Putting on airs. Could be an impostor. Trust me, I'm me. Willow crossed to the bed for a closer look at his goddaughter. She was still one of the most beautiful things he'd ever seen. Her hair was spun gold. She was plump, but babies were supposed to be so at her age. She was someone whose natural state was a smile of delight and wonder at the world arrayed before her. Thought you weren't coming, big fella. Rule had scrambled lithely to a perch on Elora's bedstead. It's a dream. I'm at home, Rule, asleep in my own bed. If you say so. Me? Frangine said. I say it's guilt. Elora's celebration it is. A year tomorrow since she came to Tir Aslin. Is Willow, her godfather, her savior, coming to be part of the festivities? He says not. He has to tend to his precious fields. I don't plant now, my family doesn't eat later. You're a wizard, Willow, said Rule. You'll manage. Does he at least send a present for the little lovely? Frangine continued remorselessly. I don't see one. Willow was about to say no, when some inspiration prompted his hand toward the traveling pouch on his left hip. His pouches were one of his earliest successes in learning the art and craft of magic. The apparent size of the bag bore no relationship whatsoever to the volume within, or how much it could carry. Food would stay fresh, water wouldn't spill. All he had to do was think about what he needed and reach in. Which is what happened. He thought of the bear, and there it was. Let my bear stand in my stead. Will that be acceptable, Highness? All that I would be, were I here, let him represent. He was seized with a rush of inspiration. I can add a portion of my strength to yours through my bear. That will make your defenses as comprehensive and resilient now as when you'll be full grown. Willow tucked the bear snug under the crook of her arm. As if that had been all she was waiting for, Elora rolled toward him, wrapping both arms and legs about the bear to ensure the stuffed animal's safe imprisonment. He rearranged her covers, missing in the process a hurried conference between the brownies, where they decided there was no way they were letting him travel home alone in so obviously demented a state. They were inside his traveling pouch before he knew what they were about, and try as he might to get them out, they remained well and truly hidden. There was one final obligation easily fulfilled. He smoothed Elora's hair from her brow and gave her a kiss and a wish for the sweetest of dreams, the happiest of tomorrows. And that was that. The next he knew, it was morning. He woke with a start beside his wife, where he'd known he'd been all the night through. He was so thankful for that realization that it was a long few moments before his mind registered what his eyes beheld from the first. A pair of brownies sitting side by side at the foot of his bed. After that, giving the lie to the loveliness of sunrise, he learned that while he'd slept, the world as he'd known it had come to its end. The eagles told him the rider was close. Thorn didn't see. The brownies were nervous enough around the tall folk in their own country, but there at least they had a wealth of trees and undergrowth to mask their presence. Here, in the shadow of the great mountain range that split the continent from top to bottom, there was nothing but prairie grassland from slopes to horizon. They wanted to hide and told Thorn so repeatedly. Thorn didn't hear. The animal's every step bespoke a fatigue sunk deep into her bones. She'd run as far and fast as she was able, but she was done. The scent of fear was strong from her, its cause brutally clear from the fresh wounds that scarred her flanks and haunch. A Daikini warrior sat atop her back, the young man's boots scored by the same claws that had slashed his mount. The trail they followed would bring them right to Thorn and his companions. The pace they maintained meant they'd reach them near nightfall. Thorn didn't care. His own boots cast puffs of dirt into the air as he made his way to the edge of the scar. Dust without any of the weight or consistency of proper earth, leached dry of moisture, of minerals, of life itself. Until 12 years ago, a mountain stood here, paramount in the range. That awful night, as cataclysms and disasters raged across the whole of the 12 domains, it had simply been destroyed, one sight among many. Thorn had seen all manner of natural disasters, and how quickly nature rushed back to heal the wounds. Here, though, normal rules seemed no longer to apply, and nothing had stepped in since to fill the void. "Just the same," he said aloud, mainly to break the eerie silence. The ground within the scar had been seared to bedrock, fused on top to glass, so that the scene most resembled a shallow bowl, although this one was miles across and easily 100 feet deep. In his mind's eye, Thorn saw another field of primal desecration, this one set amidst rolling woodlands, a place once renowned for its beauty, forever ruined. The strength of its walls, the courage of its knights, the skill of its sorcerers, none of that had saved the fabled Daikini fortress of Tir Asleen. The castle and its rulers embodied the hope of the world, and it had been wiped away in a single instant. Thorn was closer to this place now than he had been to the fortress at that moment 12 years ago. Then he had stood at the head of the valley, staring with dulled eyes as though he himself had become one of the dead. The sole legacy of the scar was a resonance that led Thorn from one sight to the next with the same inexorable force of the pole for a compass needle. After the first few, and as he honed his talent as a wizard, the pattern of destruction had become clear. Each location was a place of power, a crossroads where the lines of energy of the physical world intersected with their counterparts in the realms beyond, the domains of Faerie, home to the Vale folk. As a consequence, the devastation had been as great in their lands, and the scars as deep. Each party had its own opinion as to the cause and reason. Each had a favorite place to lay blame, with the net result that relations among the 12 domains, never comfortable on the best of days, went into a steep decline. Beyond the obvious, that a force of mind-numbing power had in a single savage moment annihilated a score of points across the whole of the world, nothing was known, not the nature of the force or its purpose, and few were eager to learn the answers, as though doing so would call down the same doom upon their own heads. It was a choice Thorn himself faced at every sight. He had known from the start that it was required of him to find answers, yet in each instance he found himself holding back. He was no less reluctant today. "Is this it, then?" he asked himself. "A dozen years on the road, in hiding, all for nothing. You saved the best for last, Peck." And he made the diminutive as cruel an insult as any who'd used it against him. "The resonances are as strong here as at Tir Asleen itself. If there are answers to be found, there's nowhere better." The cataclysm had left its mark on Thorn as much as the land. He was leaner than he'd been, his body toughened by his wanderings across the face of the globe. His skin was tight across his face, giving him the aspect of a Nelwyn twice his age. It was his eyes that marked him most, though. They were haunted eyes that had seen too much. Thorn anchored a stanchion deep into the earth, with a length of line tied snug about it, looped it around his waist, and threw a metal ring affixed to his belt. He donned well-worn buckskin gloves to protect his hands and tossed the rope over the edge. Putting his back to the scar, he took hold of his line and stepped off the rim. As soon as he touched bottom and disengaged his harness, a piece of rock caught his eye, hardly bigger than a thumbnail. He picked it up, rolled it a few moments between his palms, his eyes half closed, senses building a picture of the stone within his mind. Great age, he felt, and yet, as the world viewed such things, this particular peak had hardly been born. Young and fresh, its stark, sharp lines barely touched by sun and wind and water. There was strength to it, and special pride. This was a place of power. He thrust the pebble into a pocket of his vest and wandered deeper across the crater. He'd walk one way, then another, pass stones by, pick one up, toss it aside, then inexplicably go back to one he'd skipped before to add it to the growing collection. Each step brought him a flash-fire image of every aspect of the peak's existence, from birth to sudden early death. Slowly, working by intuition, he began placing one stone after the other on the ground before him. When at last his pocket was empty, he'd built a fair-sized pile. He was looking at the mountain in small, the towering central spire, a sheer drop to the plainsward side, with two subordinate ridges binding it to the range beyond. He looked around, aware of the wind and of the wailing undertone of anguish in its voice. "I'm sorry," he said to the cairn he was forming. "I wish I could undo what's been done." A furious gust of energy from out of the heart of the mountains struck upward and knocked him flat. He was consumed by heat. It wasn't pain, but it was nearly more than he could bear. He was sure that he was glowing. He turned his head, his body following, seeming to flow. Parts of him liquefied, then recast themselves once more when he came to rest. As he surveyed the stony boneyard, there was a form and structure to the landscape that he hadn't perceived before. He realized he could now complete consciously what he'd begun solely on instinct. There was a way to set things right. He could gather the pieces of the remains and restore them in the proper sequence. It wouldn't be easy to rebuild a mountain by hand, but he knew he was up to it. He caught sight of the next stone to add to his construction and began his glacial trek toward it. With every breath, he became more content. This was peace. This was fulfillment. He felt a swash of air as something large passed close by overhead, the impact, faintly felt, of tiny feet on his shoulders. The next he knew, equally small fingers had grabbed a respectable handful of nose hair. The brownie tugged, and Thorn popped back into his own head with an outraged yelp and a tremendous sneeze. "Talking to you, Sarah!" cried Frangine. "Saving you!" echoed his companion. "Can we go now, please?" "Hang on, Hole!" cried Frangine, and then the eagles were upon them. Two sets of claws sank deep through the fabric of Thorn's vest, closing securely without doing any harm. He felt the backwash of powerful wings as he was summarily yanked from the ground. "Careless," said Bastian, not bothering to hide his disdain as he muscled his limp burden skyward. "A fledgling's mistake," sniffed his mate, Anella, holding guard position just off Bastian's left wing. Thorn couldn't think of anything to say, so he cast his awareness outward to join with Anella's. As always, the view took his breath away. He luxuriated in the caress of air across his skin, all the sensations of flight that were hers. Then he was unceremoniously dumped on the ground close by their campsite. "That wasn't very nice," he grumped at the brownies. "We tried to get your attention," Rule said. Thorn made a face. "I didn't hear you," he told them all. A voice to the brownies, mind speech to the eagles who were flying high in the darkening eastern sky. "Too busy spirit dancing." "I ask your pardon. It's one thing to risk my own life. I had no right to make you do the same." "Find what you are looking for?" asked Frangine with malicious glee. "No," was his flat reply. "You've looked for 10 years and more, Drumheller. If you haven't learned by now, when?" Frangine was right. Thorn's search had taken him across the face of the world, yet he felt no closer to his answers today than when he set out. It was a realization that had been growing in him for a long time. He had doubly failed, not only to save those he loved, but also to avenge them. "Are you quite finished?" Thorn demanded. "Will you ever be?" Rule spoke up. "This isn't the time, Frangine." Over the years, Frangine had grown into a veritable peacock, with nary a stitch out of place regardless of circumstance. Rule, by contrast, was the more practical of the pair. His clothes were so comfortably broken in, they seemed like they'd been part of him forever. In this instance, buckskin mainly. "The daikini," Rule reminded his companion, with an edge to his tone that matched the keenness of the blades he wore at his belt. "What daikini?" Thorn asked. Frangine cocked a dismissive eyebrow. "The one we've been screaming at you about all this livelong day." Thorn followed the brownies through the scrub brush and tumbleweed. The daikini had chosen as good a defensive position as could be managed on this barren land. He'd stripped a good-sized clearing and used the gathered tinder for an impressive fire. The man's horse snuffled. In the recent past, she'd taken a nasty wound from which she'd never truly recovered. A glance told Thorn all he needed to know. Death dogs. Their bites were lethally septic. He could smell their poison within her. "Deserves it, he does. That's what I say," Frangine said in his ear. "So quick to condemn," Thorn replied. "To fight a pack of death dogs and not expect them to follow? Too stupid to live, you ask me." "I thought we were done with them. That we'd slain those few who survived Bavmorda." "Evidently not." The brownies had already climbed over the man searching for information. "See the device on his coat? He's sworn to somebody's service." Thorn nodded. "The king in Angwin. He's a pathfinder. Another wanderer far from home." Thorn cast with his ghostly senses, his insight, feeling no direct awareness of the death dogs, but he knew that meant nothing. They were bred to hide themselves from adepts of any kind. Woodsmen, warriors, and magi. The daikini has to be warned, he told his companions, and stepped clear of the rocks that had been his hiding place. Out of habit he moved silently, but the moment Thorn stirred, the daikini was out of his bedroll and into a combat crouch, drawn saber at full extension. The daikini challenged him. "Stay your distance, or you're being followed." Thorn overrode his words, his arms open to reassure the warrior he meant no harm. "Them damn wolves again. Took care of 'em the first time, do the same again." As he spoke, the daikini gathered up his crossbow, cocked it, and put an arrow into place. "They aren't wolves," Thorn held up a hand to forestall questions, "and they're here." He scrambled around the fire, making for the daikini's horse, cursing the fact his stunted legs forced him to waddle when the daikini could have been there in 2 steps. He was barely there when the poor animal shrieked in terror and pain, but mostly, he realized, defiance. A death dog sprang into view, charging straight up the slope, announcing its attack with the gobbling snarl that was their trademark. Part of the Daikini's equipment was a scabbard of short spears, though short still meant a weapon twice the Nelwyn's height. Thorn pulled one free, slamming the butt against the earth, using his body to brace it in place. The hound twisted away in midair, and Thorn was swept by the sick surety that it would dodge him. Bastion swooped right then, throwing his wings wide to pull out of a tremendous dive, lashing out at the dog with his claws. It always amazed him that the eagles could fall so far and fast and still survive. The death dog took a fatal snap at the attacker, even as Bastion muscled himself out of reach. A moment later, as it realized its mistake, it had impaled itself on Thorn's spear. Across the way, the Daikini put a bolt into the breast of another dog, the force of the impact tumbling the beast onto its forelegs. Thorn was there before it could rise again to hammer the point of another spear through its skull. "Your sword!" he bellowed to the Daikini. "Sever the head!" With a two-handed strike, the deed was done. Thorn lost count of how many they killed. The battle was so fierce he hardly had time to think, certainly none to plan. There was no sign of the brownies, who'd gone to ground until it was safe. The eagles weren't in view either. Surrounded by a pack of dogs, Thorn kept them away with a brand grasped from the fire. He waved the torch, keeping the beasts at a distance. Snapping their teeth, they dodged the flames easily. Thorn charged a breath with a streamer of power, huffed it down the length of his torch, and flames exploded outward from the burning tip. This his death dogs hadn't expected. One of them backpedaled furiously, right into one of its charging fellows, the collision sending the pair into a tumble. They recovered almost immediately and took up the chase, for Thorn was on the run as fast as he could manage, out of the campsite and across the boulder-strewn field. His slim lead vanished with every step. His advantage was that he hadn't far to go. The mountains sensed his approach. He was counting on that. He fed more power to the fire until his torch blazed with a blinding light. Another portion of power he used to mask this from the death dogs. 6 steps from the crater, he spun in his tracks and pulled the hood that hid his torchlight, flashing the solar radiance full in the death dogs' slavering faces. His next step hit empty air. He'd reached the scar. He let himself go, and the torch as well, grabbing for purchase as he crashed against the crater wall. Witch lights began flickering beneath the glassy surface, even before the death dogs leapt after him and landed. The mountains recognized a resonance of the power that had maimed them years before, and took the opportunity to strike back with all their might. Between one step and the next, the death dogs turned from flesh to molten fire, retaining form and animation for a step farther until they cooled. For an instant, Thorn beheld a pair of monstrously ugly statues. Then they were reduced to dust. He heard the stealthy pad of feet approaching from behind, and he dropped and rolled. This attacker walked on 2 legs, Thorn noted in passing as he recovered his feet. Thorn's recognition of his attacker's face almost got him killed a second time. "Farron!" he called. Then the knife flashed, and there was no more opportunity for deliberate thought. Thorn's body reacted as it had been trained to do. One hand to block the thrusting blade, another to clutch the boy's tunic. Feet presenting themselves to Farron's solar plexus, he sent the boy into a flying somersault. Farron tried to land like a death dog, twisting to his feet and facing his foe, but his body hadn't yet grown sufficiently to fulfill those demands. The boy struck hard, shoulder first, that impact costing him his hold on the knife, which Thorn immediately kicked over the edge of the scar. Farron opened his mouth, baring long fangs. When he flexed his fingers, Thorn caught a gleam of claws where human nails once had been. "Farron, no!" A waste of breath. Thorn knew that when he spoke. The boy sprang, but the Nelwyn stood his ground and caught Farron's hands in his own. The boy snapped his teeth, trying for Thorn's throat, but Thorn had a slight advantage in arm length and put it to good use, pushing up and away, stretching Farron's arms to full extension. There was blood on the boy's breath. He knew there was no hope, a foregone conclusion the moment Farron had tasted blood, tasted death. But he turned the full force of his insight on the boy, regardless, praying to find a remnant of the lad he'd brought into the world. As he did so, his fingers tightened their grip. He bent the boy backward, more and more, until at last, with an awful crack, Farron's spine broke. Thorn dropped beside him, gathering the boy gently into his lap. There was only blind hatred in Farron's eyes, the lust of a death dog eager for its kill. He had hoped to see something more. Such was the way with death dogs. The hounds themselves were animal. The leader of a hunting pack, however, had to be human and embrace this abominable path as an active choice. Thorn yearned to repay 1,000-fold the one who'd murdered the soul of this boy and bring to the creature responsible such pain and more as he felt now. The walk back to camp was an interminable slog. Thorn found the Daikini bruised and shaken, but unhurt. The horse, however, lay on her side, and Thorn marveled that there was blood enough within her for her noble heart still to pump. She responded to his presence as he knelt beside her. He cast loose his own spirit, and with his insight reached deep into the mare. They merged, and in that moment he understood the transcendent physical glory of running. He cleansed the poison from her system. He smoothed the chipped and broken bones. He stitched the slashes on her body closed. All the while he kept her blood burning through her veins. At the same time he grew ever more cold. His skin paled, lips and fingertips turning slightly blue, as though he'd been sketched with ice. Life remained within him solely as an act of will. All else was devoted to his patient. At long last he let his head loll forward. The mare's head lay in his lap. She radiated his cleansing warmth, and he drew on that to restore some sensation to his frozen hands. As the sun rose the next morning, the mare whickered, bending her legs gingerly at first, as though to reassure herself they were still attached. She tucked them under herself, then rolled to her feet. "Windfleet," Thorn said, as though knowing her name was as natural as knowing his own. "Tough lady." He sensed a change in her mood as he picked up a stray bit of tack, her bridle. Windfleet wasn't happy to see it, and as he turned the construction of leather and steel in his hand, he felt his mouth twist in sympathetic memory, a resonance of the bond he and the mare had shared. He flicked the bridle aside, then turned to the mare with a shrug of his shoulders and a lift of his hands, as if to say, "What, you're still here?" He offered a bow, which she returned. With a cry of pure delight, she sped from the campsite, picking her way unerringly along a path only she could see until she reached the open plains. The Daikini's name was Jerin Havelhand. When he woke, he wasn't happy to find his horse gone. As it was their sole mode of transport, neither were the brownies. But with surprising ease, Jerin modified his saddle into a fairly serviceable backpack. Thorn had his own tasks to perform. He hooked his hands under the armpits of the last of the hounds and backpedaled towards the scar, then let the creature fall to its grave. He did the same thing again and again, until there was only one left. "Leave it lie, Thorn," said a small voice, with a rare use of the name Sorsha had given him. "Was a sorcerer who made him do the killing, Drumheller," Frangine said. "There's no blame on you for what was done here." "Doesn't matter. This is my job, because the shadow arts are involved, and I may well be the only one with even a hope of bringing the fiend responsible to justice." He took the boy in his arms, ignoring the protests of his muscles, and made his way to the edge of the crater. "I should have found you sooner, Farron. For that, I am truly sorry." He couldn't let go. The boy had to be dropped, as the dogs had been, so that not even ashes would be left to further befoul this already blighted landscape. Suddenly, the air about him blazed hot as a furnace. Streamers of raw flames swirled around his legs, up his back, over his shoulders, down his arms, and stretched themselves along the body that he held until it was as encased as he. With the faintest pop of imploding air, both fire and burden were gone, the one reducing the other to less than ashes, as though it had never been. Thorn was untouched, at least in body. He waited for a moment, as the mountain spirits kept a healthy distance. He made a helpless gesture, not really an apology, for there was nothing he could say that could take away the hurt inflicted here, and he'd already refused to do what was wanted of him. At the last, he simply said, "Thank you." "Whatever the hell you doing, Peck?" demanded a voice from on high. diminutive term for a diminutive people, favored by those lacking sufficient wit to see beyond the obvious. He hated it. Just tidying up. Thorn gathered up his pack and followed the daikini to the outer edge of the brush, where it faded into scrub grass and boulders. There Geron paused. "You healed my horse. You are a witchy boy." "Hardly," which was as far as he dared stretch the truth, since he didn't consider himself a witch and hadn't been a boy in longer than he cared to remember. The young man fiddled on his feet from one to the other as if his boots pinched. "Whatever. Stood by me. Did your fair share on the killing ground. Scales between us, they're most likely balanced." As they started on their way, Thorn said, "If you've a different path to walk, my friend, I'll not be offended." "First, a daikini along a trail few of his kind have ever ridden," said Frangine in his ear, from a perch atop Thorn's shoulder, snugged among the folds of his cloak. "Then a great hunt of death dogs. Interesting coincidence, don't you think?" "I'd rather not think at all, thank you very much." "No game around here." That was Geron, blissfully unaware of Thorn's other conversation. "No water along my back trail. Leastways, not that we can reach in time. They've been all fouled by the death dogs." "Do you know this country?" Shake of the head. No reason to. No settlements up this way, not even wanderer bands. Suppose this is King's land. Probably claim it so in Engwin, but only 'cause it's here. Ain't even been proper mapped." "Then what brought you here?" "A fool's errand, I was starting to think. Was told there was a healer roaming the high country. Been trouble on the river. Needed help bad, that's what was said. I'm good on a trail. Figured I'd bring him in." "No fool you, Geron, at least in that regard." "You're the healer, then?" "Among other things." "Had a fair chance mounted. A foot hard and bare as this country is, don't know how long it'll take to reach the settlement." Thorn pointed across the plain, a little to the left of the sunrise. 3 days that direction will bring us to a river, an uplands tributary of the Serenya." "Not much use, unless you have a boat handy." Thorn allowed himself a smile. "You never know." "So the lad found you, did he, Drumheller?" Mulroon called. He had anchored his keelboat in midstream, and long before reaching the river, Thorn saw the telltale flash of a telescope being leveled in their direction. "Good thing for both of us that he did. The great hunt came for us that very night." Mulroon was as sour-faced as ever, as though he'd been kept waiting just this side of eternity. Not so tall as Geron, this daikini was built like a barrel, and was just as hard to move when he wasn't in the mood. He'd been Thorn's fast friend ever since Thorn had healed Mulroon's brother-in-law after an attack by a random clutch of death dogs. Mulroon and the crewman at the oars stayed seated as the jolly boat touched shore and the two travelers climbed aboard. As the boat cleared the shore, Thorn saw ripples just beneath the water's surface, a few body lengths out, pacing the boat. "Since when do the Were act as combat flankers?" Mulroon's people, the Kaskani, were rovers, by land when necessary, but preferably by water. They hailed from a group of rugged islands and ages ago had formed an alliance with the Were, a sleek-furred race who claimed the ocean as their home. Together the two races roamed the whole of the globe and helped bind it together with trade. "Seemed prudent to enlist the Were under the circumstances," Mulroon replied. "Those damnable dogs tore through Saganak, 3 weeks back, just before the dark of the moon. Left dead and worse behind." "I know. Farron." "In all the chaos was a while afore anyone realized he was missing." "It was me they were after," Thorn said quietly. "That's why they took Farron." Thorn clambered up to his favorite perch atop the main cabin with his back to the signal mast, where he could enjoy the warmth of the sun. Mulroon called up. "Death Dog's been hunting all this while, then? Since Tir Asleen?" Thorn shook his head. "I don't think so. They'd have caught up to us before now." "Beg pardon, shipmaster," Geron asked. "Heard you mention Tir Asleen." "What's that to you?" "Me sergeant back in Bandicourt, he been there. was part of a triple century of pathfinders sent by the king. Thorn kept his tone casual. Why did the Angwin king send a force of pathfinders to Tierraslin? How should I know? I figure they was looking for Willow. I beg your pardon, Thorn said. The Nelwyn sorcerer, don't you know? Willow of Good. Willow of Good, Thorn repeated. Now, there's a name I haven't heard in a very long time.